Welcome to our Advertising, Media, and Brands Global Compliance Challenge series. My name is Marisol Mork. I am a litigation partner here at Squire Patton Boggs, and I'm based in our Los Angeles office. I'm also global co-chair of the SPB's Advertising, Media, and Brands Industry Group. I advise global clients in a wide range of matters, such as consumer protection issues and litigation risks in the advertising, marketing, and media sectors. I also partner with clients on brand protection measures and serve as anti-counterfeiting counsel to multinational consumer product corporations. In the last 24 months, the world has experienced a series of unprecedented events that have had social, economic, legal, and regulatory consequences. Today, we are still grappling with and navigating the resulting consequences. Brexit, a global pandemic, a profound change in U.S. government administration. Those are just a few of the key events that have created a dynamic and challenging landscape for businesses to navigate. Businesses are grappling with heightened regulation of data and advertising standards, mandatory reporting, and a pending change in global taxation. Couple this with a rise in ESG, or environmental, social, and governance concerns that is changing the nature of business operations and business cultures, accelerated changes in consumer behavior, and a new hybrid or even fully remote working model. Businesses are facing significant changes. Today, we bring together a panel of retail, policy, and legal experts to discuss pending policies and changes in regulation, emerging sector trends, and the key sectors for growth and consumer behaviors in order to help businesses in the advertising, media, and brand sector feel more prepared in tackling the challenges that lie ahead. Without further ado, I would like to introduce our impressive panel of guests who join me today. Matthew Kirk is the former UK ambassador to Finland. He was also a member of the Vodafone Group Executive Committee for 9 years. He is an international affairs advisor in the public policy practice at Squire Patton Boggs, providing strategic advice on business, politics, and international law from our London office. Kyle Fath is a partner in SPB's data privacy, cybersecurity, and digital assets practice. Kyle has a unique blend of experience in advising companies on compliance with data privacy laws, drafting and negotiating technology agreements, and advising on the privacy, IT, and IP implications of mergers and acquisitions and other corporate transactions. He is SPB's resident expert on new technologies, including NFTs and ad tech. Kyle is the author of a number of texts on data privacy laws and a recognized expert in the digital field. Richard Lim is the Chief Executive Officer of Retail Economics, an independent economics research consultancy focused on the consumer and retail industry. Richard has a wealth of experience in data analytics, retail insight, economics, and consumer research. He was also voted as a top 20 voice for LinkedIn for sharing his insights on the retail industry. And he also appeared in the final of The Apprentice as one of Lord Sugar's advisors. Welcome, everyone. Matthew, I will turn to you first. The pandemic has obviously created a dynamic and very challenging landscape for businesses to navigate. From your perspective, can you elaborate on the current context and current business landscape? How do you see us coming out of the pandemic?
Thank you very much, Marisol. I think the first thing to say is that the pandemic is still with us and likely to be with us for several years to come. But clearly all of our societies are getting better at managing it and dealing with it, and that has strong positive implications for business. We've seen unprecedented levels of government intervention in the economy, and that has broadly worked. The economy has come out of what has been an incredible shock in much better shape than I think many people expected as we were going into it. And the bounce back has been pretty strong in most countries. But there is still fragility. There's still fragility caused by the pandemic. There's also fragility in the supply chain and in global trade as a whole, which is affecting the pace of recovery in a number of economies. And I'd make a couple of other comments. One is that I think that that fragility in the supply chain is causing businesses to rethink their supply chains to an extent, with resilience and locality becoming more important features, and that leads to greater use of technology almost undoubtedly in the supply chain. And the second is that we've also been through a profound social test, and our societies have been put under incredible stress and have broadly, again, responded very well to that. That has led, I think, to greater scrutiny of economic actors and businesses, and a greater expectation that businesses need to show how they are acting consistent with the phrase, we're all in this together. So you mentioned ESG. ESG is going to be of growing significance for businesses across most major economies.
Those are all such excellent points, and resonate so clearly with many of the topics we've covered during this podcast. Given the economic changes that we've all experienced, the changes in societal kind of viewpoints that have been changing, and just the changing business landscape, how has that impacted policymakers when they think of advertising, media, and brands? From where you sit in the UK and EU, what do you see as being the top of mind issues for policymakers right now?
So I think, talking mainly about the EU, the UK has separate policy initiatives which go in a similar direction to the EU. But looking at principally at the EU, you can see a heavy legislative agenda on the digital side. The EU has decided that the two main themes of economic recovery post-pandemic will be digital and environment, greening the economy. And obviously there's a link between the two. A more digital economy, you would hope, is a greener economy. Within that, there are some major legislative initiatives going through the EU processes at the moment. A Digital Services Act, which is particularly focused on content, on protection of vulnerable people within society, on editorial responsibility and those kinds of issues. A Digital Markets Act, which it looks at the role of major platforms in a competitive economy, and will seek to regulate the way in which platforms operate to ensure that competition remains at the heart of the economy. There is a proposal coming shortly, we think, for greater due diligence in the supply chain and a greater understanding of impacts that businesses have in areas such as human rights. Then we have the world's first serious attempt to write a new codification of legislation for artificial intelligence with a sophisticated risk management framework within it, which for all users of artificial intelligence, which is virtually all industries of the future, will have important implications for how they manage their use of technology. And the Data Act, which looks at how larger businesses in particular should be sharing data, industrial data, in order to stimulate growth in the economy and so forth. So a great deal on the legislative agenda, all of which has impacts in various different ways for advertisers and brand promoters. I would say, sitting alongside that, we also have recent developments between Russia and Ukraine, which are obviously very much on policymakers' minds. Those will have two impacts on the economy, undoubtedly. One is on energy prices and volatility in the energy market, which could destabilize the economic recovery. And the other, which I think all businesses will need to pay a lot of attention to, is in sanctions legislation. We're likely to see packages of sanctions in the US, in the UK, in the EU, which will go considerably further than sanctions have in the past as far as Russia is concerned. And given the role of Russian businesses in many of our industries, that could have quite important implications for how businesses think about how they manage their relationships.
So many of those issues that you mentioned are also in the headlines here in the United States and at the forefront of businesses' minds, particularly in the advertising and media space. When you speak about platform accountability here in the United States, we've also seen our US Congress focused on the impact of social media upon young users. This last fall, for example, we saw the CEOs of the largest platforms each being called to testify before Congress, answering questions about how social networks work, how they spread information and potentially harm the mental health of young users. Our Congress is certainly calling for greater transparency and considering the need to implement stronger laws to police social media platforms. So that remains very top of mind here in the United States as well. There is also an increased focus and a sustained focus, I should say, on data security and privacy measures. Here, we continue to have an absence of federal privacy legislation. And in light of that absence, we've seen individual states creating and enacting their own privacy laws. California, Colorado, and Virginia have each adopted their own privacy laws, which generally regulate the collection, use, and disclosure of personal data. They also provide consumers with several rights, and businesses expect that more states will be following suit by enacting their own laws, and several have consumer and data privacy proposals already in the works. Additionally, there's been a real shift in the United States in terms of where the regulatory and enforcement powers lie and activity power. Members of Congress have called upon our Federal Trade Commission, the FTC, to enact rules in the absence of federal privacy legislation. And the FTC very recently announced that it may actually begin commercial surveillance rulemaking to curb what it views as lax security practices, a need to limit privacy abuses, and ensure that the algorithmic decision making that is used by these platforms does not result in unlawful discrimination. This rulemaking process would be quite lengthy, but would certainly have far-ranging impacts, as the rules may aim to limit privacy abuses and perhaps also limit targeted advertising, given the focus on commercial surveillance. The FTC has had a new chair since June of 2021 and has demonstrated that it does have a renewed focus on enforcement, and that it aims to use its entire arsenal of tools and authorities, including its penalty powers. As we've covered in these podcasts, the FTC this last fall used its notice of penalty offense power for the first time since the Reagan administration as a way to seek monetary damages, and targeted hundreds of household names for advertising and endorsement practices. Kyle, what else are you seeing in terms of policy changes and what's coming down the pipeline for emerging technology?
Thanks, Marisol. I think one of the issues I'd like to highlight today is the significant activity around the world by regulators and lawmakers on artificial intelligence, or AI. As Matthew mentioned, the EU Parliament is currently considering the AI Act, which would, among other things, create regulatory oversight for a wide range of AI applications and establish a central regulator on the topic. The United States has also been active and will continue to be active in the area of AI. Marisol, you mentioned the FTC, which is the agency in the United States that regulates trade, competition, and consumer protection issues, among other things. They are poised to issue rules on AI, as it often refers to it as algorithmic decision making, sometime this month. There are a range of issues that the FTC may seek to regulate, as it announced in the notice at the end of 2021. Marisol, I think you mentioned bias. That is certainly central to what may be in the FTC's forthcoming rulemaking. And it certainly has declared, algorithmic and biometric bias as a focus of enforcement in resolutions passed in the fall of 2021. So its notice in December of 2021 builds upon the AI focus with reference to unlawful discrimination, likely signaling rulemaking area. In addition, dozens of state legislatures have introduced AI-directed legislation in a variety of ways. First, in general privacy bills that would broadly regulate profiling, automated decision making based on an individual's personal information, such as in targeted advertising. Second, bills that there are bills that more broadly and generally regulate AI. And then finally, there are more specific legislation that addresses very specific types of AI applications, such as the use of facial recognition technology. In addition, a number of states have proposed to convene task forces on AI with the goal of identifying issues and framing future legislation on the topic. So, needless to say, AI is top of mind for regulators and lawmakers in the US, EU, and across the world.
Certainly. There is a lot coming down the pipeline, it seems, everywhere that may affect advertising, media, and brands. Matthew, given the policy background we just discussed, where do you see the opportunities for growth in the advertising and media and brands industry? Are there any key areas for growth that you can identify for us?
So, Marisol, I think the first thing, as we've been saying, there's a lot happening in the regulatory agenda everywhere, and I think it's really important to look properly into that regulatory agenda and see where it will bring opportunities for advertisers. Some obvious areas, Carl mentioned transparency. I think transparency about how ad platforms operate, and transparency also about algorithms, algorithmic bias, the operation of algorithms, and so forth. That's going to be a key area to look at, and one where I think the effect of some of this regulation will shift the balance a bit between the big internet platforms and the advertisers, and undoubtedly open opportunities to advertisers there. I think in the editorial area, similarly, the greater editorial accountability that we're seeing will put the advertisers and the brand owners more in control of the way in which their material is presented digitally, and that undoubtedly is an opportunity to reinforce brand values. Which leads me on to, in a sense, to complete the circle and go back to where we started. This area of social accountability, ESG, the role of companies and brands in our societies, I think is of growing and very significant importance. And I think there will be a premium in that area on finding the right ways to communicate, which are not seen as greenwashing, as it's sometimes referred, just coming out with nice glossy stories saying how wonderful people are, but actually really get into the impact that brands and corporates are having, and the way in which they're addressing some of the major challenges that our society faces. I think the advertisers who can seize both those opportunities in regulation, which put them in greater control of the way in which their message spreads, and the content of their message so that it addresses these societal issues and addresses popular demand in that area, they could see a very substantial increase in impact over the coming years.
Matthew, I couldn't agree more with you on those points, especially your point about ESG. I mean, we've clearly seen it emerge as an issue that consumers care about. We're seeing customers make purchasing decisions around the environmental and sustainability credentials of the companies they're buying from. But as you note, they do have to walk that fine line to avoid greenwashing while truthfully and being transparent about their sustainability goals. But I see that too as being a real area for potential growth. Social responsibility is going to help drive consumer loyalty, and I think companies that can embrace ESG responsibility, and do it well, really stand to gain in this in the present. Thank you, Matthew. Kyle, let me turn to you now. In terms of emerging technology, tell us about some interesting cases and trends that you're seeing.
I think really one of the interesting and emerging trends is the metaverse, which we're hearing about quite a bit. And so just really talk about what is the metaverse very briefly. So it's, broadly speaking, it's a virtual world that can be accessed through virtual reality, augmented reality, other hardware or software. So the metaverse term was coined in a 1992 science fiction novel, Snow Crash, in which the metaverse was embodied as a single, immersive, virtual reality world where people interacted as avatars. So in reality, the current metaverse is comprised of a number of distinct virtual worlds, such as video games like Fortnite and Roblox, or Meta's virtual reality world Horizon. But the metaverse has, become subject to, a significant amount of buzz and hype after Facebook's rebranding to Meta.
We're hearing about the metaverse just all the time, it seems like, and the role that NFTs play in the metaverse too, right? Can you tell us a little bit about the roles that NFTs play in that space and how are brands engaging with NFTs in this metaverse that is actually in our universe?
Yeah, sure. So in the metaverse, NFTs play a number of roles. Virtual items minted as NFTs on blockchain technology are wearable by avatars in virtual worlds such as Roblox. For example, Gucci sold virtual NFT sneakers that were wearable by players in Roblox. In addition, there are a number of virtual metaverses where virtual land can be bought and sold, including Decentraland and Sandbox. And so NFTs provide a secure and immutable chain of ownership. It's basically could be a property record, certificate of authenticity. And NFTs act as records of ownership of virtual land in the metaverse. So I think there's a lot of hype on NFTs right now, and I think there's been some criticism. There's a lot of the market is flooded with people trying to get in on the action, especially with artwork. But as it relates to advertisers and media and brands, there are a lot of success stories and use cases that seem to have staying power. The metaverse and NFTs present significant additional opportunities for advertisers and brands to engage with consumers and for creators, media, and entertainment companies to monetize content. Many people heard about the NBA, which is America's Pro Basketball League, their Top Shot NFT program, e-commerce site where they sell clips of moments of favorite teams and players that's been wildly successful. A number of advertisers have capitalized on the trend in order to drive brand growth and engage new customers. Consumer packaged goods companies such as Anheuser-Busch did an NFT drop for an NFT horse racing game in which it sold Stella Artois NFT skins and other digital memorabilia. Adidas sold a digital tracksuit. But one of the cool trends, along with digital items, Adidas also sold a physical tracksuit paired with the digital NFT tracksuit. Nike's heading in that direction. Recently purchased a digital sneaker company called Artifact. So I think there's a lot of hype and criticism around the space right now with NFTs and metaverse, broadly Web3, but especially in the advertising, media, and brand space, it appears that they're here to stay.
Right. NFTs are not the fad that people were saying they were going to be when we first started hearing about them. I mean, it really does look like what you're saying, says we're going to see a lot more in this space this coming year for sure. I'm glad we have you as our resident expert to walk us through all questions metaverse related. Richard, turning to you now, the other key part of the puzzle in terms of where we are and where we're going in the advertising, media, and brand space is, of course, consumers. And undoubtedly, during the pandemic, businesses and consumers all moved to the online space. How have you seen the pandemic impact consumer behavior? And are the changes you're seeing here to stay?
Sure. Thanks, Marisol. So yeah, this has been the biggest change caused by the pandemic. We've seen this seismic shift towards online. Just to put some context around that, in the UK, we had the proportion of online sales that was 19% in 2019. That rose to 28% in 2020. So within that, just that kind of 12-month period, we saw an acceleration, a shift towards online of about 5 years in the space of 12 months. It has kind of rebalanced now to about 26%. But what we've seen actually is that that shift towards online has been quite uneven across different sectors. And so as we've seen the economy kind of open up again, and we've seen non-essential retailers be able to trade again over the last couple of years, there's been a kind of a rebalancing of the proportion of online sales, but it's been quite uneven. Our research, what it essentially shows is that a lot of that, the kind of the stickiness towards online, has been around apparel, home products, and also food. To put that into context, again, so food used to be about 5.5% online. It's now about 10% of grocery shopping is online. And so we've seen that the proportion of grocery sales that have remained online has remained at that kind of elevated level. But we've also seen explosion of other kind of parts of the industry as well. So we've seen kind of rapid delivery explode as well. Companies like Getir and Gorillas have really seen aggressive growth over that period. And so that's really been disrupting the grocery sector as well. So there's been lots of changes, but that shift towards online also has been more extensive than just the retail sector. It's been across the whole digital ecosystem. So lots of investment within, made by retailers, but also by the courier services, also by kind of automation, logistics. So actually the whole digital ecosystem has seen a huge shift towards online.
Sure. And certainly, I mean, advertisers, manufacturers, and businesses in general have had to respond to that move to online by increasing their use of digital sales channels, right? And online sales have obviously become of paramount importance given some of the figures that you were just citing for us and that shift and increase. Has that shift towards online provided an impetus for brands to sell directly to consumers now?
Absolutely. We've seen really significant growth in the direct consumer space by some of those big brands. So for example, Adidas now sells about 41% direct consumer. For Nike, it's about 35%. Under Armour about 40%. So there's been a massive shift towards selling direct consumer. But what I'd also add though is that shift, that digital shift, has been felt right across the entire customer journey, not just that point of purchase. And so that shift towards digital has been felt across right at the beginning of the customer journey, raising awareness raising awareness of brands and products, to researching goods, to purchase, to fulfillment, service and returns. So actually that shift towards digital has been felt right across the customer journey. And in many ways, brands are increasingly fighting for consumers' attentions online. And so a lot of that fight has been across these big digital platforms, whether that's Google, YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, Snapchat. Because we're spending so much time online, that's where the battle for customers' attentions are being fought. And so in many ways that's changed the economics of online retailing as well. And so it's become increasingly expensive to reach out to some to some existing customers, because that space has become more competitive. It's pushing up the cost per acquisition, and like I say, that's changing the economics of online retailing quite significantly. And the other side of it is, because we're having that shift towards online in the UK, at least anyway, we simply have got too many stores, too much space. Retailers are trying to adapt their business model to be able to account for these shifts in consumer behavior, and that's changing the economics of store retailing as well. I think that kind of feeds back into the fact that the brands that are looking to sell direct to consumer are looking at this as an opportunity to take up more physical space. But the purpose of the store and the role of the store is really changing. And from a brand perspective, it's increasingly about building experiences, and they're seen more as a marketing expense, where it's about creating experiences and that physical space, merging physical and digital realms together, and essentially that space becoming an effective customer acquisition tool.
Yeah, a lot going on there. And it sounds like it's impacting certainly the relationships that brands were used to having with their customers. How do you see the shift towards digital now really influencing the way that brands can tell if they own the relationship they have with their customers?
Yeah, again, this is an interesting change in strategy for many retailers, but particularly for big brands who are looking to establish a better direct to consumer relationship, because for many of them, they just haven't had data on their consumers. And so building a better relationship, whether that's a direct to consumer online, or whether that's trying to have better information in terms of store analytics to try to create that holistic view of the customer journey that's bouncing between physical and digital, it's become a really key component for brands, and data has really been at the center point of that. And if they can understand the customer journey better, and then they can and essentially they can communicate, they can curate the story with consumers much more effectively as well.
Well, certainly with the shift towards online, the importance of data and the regulatory changes that we're seeing, it's a different landscape that all businesses are operating in. And I thank you each, Richard, Kyle, and Matthew, for sharing your insights today, with what businesses should be thinking about to be better prepared as we move forward. Thank you all for listening to this podcast. We hope that the content was informative and valuable for your business. Over the last 4 months, Squire Patton Boggs and BDO have worked together in producing a series of webinars and written materials that address the key issues facing the advertising, media, and brands industry in more detail. These webinars have focused on global data, technology and tax, the M&A landscape and top due diligence risk, global anti-counterfeiting and brand protection trends, the rise of ESG and global workforce challenges. All of these materials are available on the Squire Patton Boggs website, and a link will be made available with this recording. If you would like to discuss any of the matters raised today or in our Global Compliance Challenge series, then please get in touch with one of our legal experts and we would be happy to help. Thank you, everyone. Have a nice day.